How's it going, guys? My name's Graham and welcome back to Two Left Thumbs. Today I want to talk about the new movie King Arthur Legend of the Sword. I've only done a few movie reviews on this channel before and it's been a really long time since I've done one, but I want to try and bring them back onto the channel. Before I dive into my actual review, I just wanted to spend a minute or so up at the top talking about the reviews and performance of this movie. Right now, the critics are just hammering this movie. It's got about a 23% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and 79% from the audience. I've never seen a 50+% spread like that. That's just absurd. Keep in mind those aren't actual scores that critics and audiences are giving. It's the percentage of the critics and audience who have considered this movie fresh. So obviously the critics aren't happy with something, but the audience members who are seeing it are enjoying it, so that's really strange to see. And it's strange because audience members just aren't seeing this movie. Word of mouth hasn't seemed to help anything like that. It was a $175 million hyperinflated budget, and then it only made about $40 million worldwide in its opening weekend. I have no idea why. I've been excited about this movie for a long time. I thought the trailer was cool. Guy Ritchie is a big draw for me. It's like whenever I see Nolan directed a movie, then I'm gonna go see that movie, just like automatically. I think King Arthur's cool, and we haven't seen a movie from him in a long time. But I've heard people say they don't really like Charlie Hunnam, they think the marketing for this movie was bad, and that King Arthur content is like oversaturated. And I don't know what people are talking about, like oversaturated. We don't have any awesome epic fantasy medieval movies right now. Like a big series of that could have been really cool. And the last King Arthur movie was Clive Owen in 2004. There might have been a bunch in like the 80s and 90s, but I think it's time to bring that back. We've had 3 Spider-Mans in the last 12 years. Why can't we have a new King Arthur? I feel like I could do an entire video just talking about how this movie's tanking right now, how I wish it was doing better, and most people probably don't want to hear that, so I'm going to move on to the review now. For people who are worried about spoilers, I'm not really going to get into spoilers in this movie. If you want to go in totally blind, then maybe this review isn't for you, but I'm not going to get into many specifics. And for those of you who are concerned, there isn't really anything in this movie that can be spoiled for you. You probably don't really have to avoid headlines or articles or stuff like that. I want to start off by saying that I like the movie because I like to start my reviews with my criticisms and work up to things that I liked. Was it outstanding? Maybe not. Was it an over-the-top action movie with cool fantasy elements and decent story and fun directing? Yeah, totally. I think my biggest criticism is that other than Charlie Hunnam and Jude Law, most of the characters were pretty generic and totally flat. Those 2 leads are fleshed out and have some depth to them. Everyone else is just kind of in the background. They still make for fun, light moments, and they have entertaining banter between each other in a very Guy Ritchie sort of way, but none of them really mattered. And while I'm talking about that Ritchie-like quality, I do feel that this movie didn't have enough of that. He's usually got super fun characters, his quick-cut editing, all that crazy banter between characters, those typical sort of scenes where someone's walking you through like the events of their day, but then it's being intercut with the conversation they're having with the character and how everything played out, and it's jumping all over the place. It's usually a lot of fun, and I don't think I'll ever personally get sick of it. It's unfortunate that there's only actually like 3 scenes done this way in the entire movie. The opening scene, which is kind of like a quick origin of Arthur from when he was like 5 years old to when he's in his 30s or however old he is. It shows him growing up as like a little street punk kid. That worked really well. The next one was Arthur explaining this kind of incident he had with a group of Vikings. That one was exciting and really well done. And then the third one was just handled poorly, and I'm going to single it out specifically in another point here in just a minute. They really should have like halved the budget on this one and just focused on more character-driven moments and more of that Ritchie-ness. I mean, those things are Guy Ritchie's strength, and if you're not going to make use of them here, then maybe hire a different director. Sometimes it feels like 2 different directors worked on this movie when it's going from his exciting, quick-cut, fun banter stuff to like generic action scenes. So this one scene I want to single out maybe borders on a spoiler. If you want to go in with as little like framing of the plot as possible, then skip ahead. I'm going to put a timestamp down below here and I'll talk for a little bit so you can see that timestamp and you can consider skipping ahead. Go to that if you don't want to hear about this scene. but I really don't think it counts as a spoiler because it ends up being a very inconsequential scene. It's cut in a Ritchie way where Arthur and the other characters are talking about how they're going to meet with the Lords and how they expect it to play out, intercut with how it actually plays out. So that's a fun stylistic thing that Ritchie does quite often. But it really loses its way here because the 6 Lords refuse to help. They say no. And rather than having Arthur, use his silver tongue to try and convince them or bust out some blackmail to force them or something, they just say no. They say, darn, wish you would have helped, but you know what, we don't actually need you whatsoever. And because of that, this movie just kind of like stumbles along and then peters out and fizzles away and didn't matter, and it just created this weird, confusing moment in the middle of the movie that didn't go anywhere and had no payoff and never got tied back in any way. Totally mishandled, really kind of terrible scene. In a movie with an overall strong, well laid out plot, that scene really... bleh. This next point kind of toes the line between compliment and criticism because I have good and bad to say. When looking at the CGI, the action sequences, and Guy Ritchie's overall directing, despite a lot of criticisms that I've read, I think the CGI here looked really good. I don't know what people are expecting, that there's going to be a bunch of Life of Pi type shit where you're not going to be able to tell the difference between real life and animation. Guess what? The studio who did Life of Pi went bankrupt. This is as good as you can get CGI without the companies working on it going bankrupt. So I thought the CGI was fine. Excalibur is made out to be like this powerful, epic weapon, like it's its own force, and it kind of has like a bit of its own mind and stuff. The way they handled the sword itself, The Legend of the Sword, very appropriate subtitle, because they made the sword like unstoppably badass and super fucking cool. There's these awesome slow motion action sequences where you can get a little bit of taste of that Guy Ritchie flair, and they work super well. Anytime there was a bigger battle with a full army and the camera's swooping in and there's all these quick jump cuts all over the battle scene and swoop cut, swoop cut, cut, swoop cut. And like, it's just disorienting and it's just a mess. And because there's so much going on screen with the armies and the CGI and the crazy backgrounds and what have you, it just blurs together into this mess. And like, thank God I went and watched this movie in 2D, because I just don't see movies in 3D anymore because I hate them. Like, it was disorienting and messy looking in 2D. If people were trying to watch that shit in 3D, they probably would have walked out or like barfed on the floor or something. Like, it would have been terrible. And that's the point of this review, is to push home my agenda of I hate 3D movies and I want them to go away because I can never find a convenient showtime in 2D. It's not really the thesis here. I just have to get that off my chest. I just want to put that opinion out there. I fucking hate 3D movies. There's a big showdown at the end that's like a generic good guy versus big villain. And I don't know, it was done well enough, but it was probably too long. And again, if you're going to hire Guy Ritchie, then do something more creative than generic final showdown. So now I want to move on to things in the movie that I did like. I've heard a lot of people say Charlie Hunnam is a shitty actor and a bad leading man. No way, he was great in this movie. I read like the next leading contender to play the part was Henry Cavill, like the guy who's playing the new Superman. He's like this charismatic, charming, suave, cool guy, like Bond, like actor in a lot of the roles I've seen him in, and that just wouldn't have worked here. This version of Arthur is like this streetwise, snarky smart ass of an Arthur, and Charlie Hunnam plays that to a T. This character's a shithead, and Hunnam plays him like a shithead, and it works super well. I thought it was great. His character arc is pretty simple. He's like this street-savvy kid who doesn't really have any interest in power. When he has the opportunity for power, then he kind of like resists it. He has to go through all this conflict and everything. Pretty simple story arc, but Hunnam did a good job with it. I thought it worked well. And I don't really know Hunnam from anything else. I never saw Sons of Anarchy. And so whatever judgment that people have on him personally, they should really reserve until they see this movie for themselves, because I think they're criticizing him based on other roles, not this one. I thought Jude Law was super cool. I thought he made a surprisingly good villain. I never would have thought Jude Law would make a cool villain. His character easily had the most emotional depth, And I really like movies that do a good job of showing you both sides of things so you can truly understand where that villain's coming from. That always adds a lot to a movie. His power came from a lot of personal sacrifices, and I think Jude Law does a good job of showing that intensity and that weight that this character is carrying on his shoulders. I thought it worked really well. Made for like a really intriguing villain. Aidan Gillen from Game of Thrones is in the movie. Even though his character is like not a very major role, I still really liked him in this movie. One drawback is that he always talks like this. I think that must just be how the actor talks. Which makes him sound identical to Littlefinger, so it's a little weird having to like disassociate the two, but he was still pretty cool. Hey, maybe for $175 million, maybe the CGI should have been a bit better. I don't know, but I think it looked good enough. The coolest use of the CGI, I can't really get into because I think it maybe is a spoilery moment, just because I think it's surprising and it was really unexpected for me, and so I don't want to ruin that for you guys. On to probably the biggest highlight of this movie. The soundtrack was unreal. That was probably like the best soundtrack I've heard in a movie in a long time. There was like these hard-hitting, epic battle songs, and then these lighter, slower, kind of Celtic influence, like fluty songs and stuff. It was just a great mix of things that set this very unique tone. The music just had me so engaged, and honestly, it might have taken this movie from like a very simple, generic, everyday medieval fantasy movie to something like really special that really feels like its own unique world. To kind of wrap things up, by the end of the movie, we might only know a couple of the characters really well, but there's this huge open world set up here with a few like little teases of characters who could like show up in future installments. I'd love to return to this franchise every few years and watch the epic quests of Arthur and his knights. It's really a shame people are skipping over this one in the theaters because I think most people would really like it. And this movie, I think, would lend itself well to a sequel. I hate when movies are made being like, this is movie 1 of the 14 movies we have planned. And usually I think focus on making sure the first movie was good. And the shame here is that the first movie was good. And it would lend itself well to a sequel for a change. And it's probably not going to get the chance. I don't like giving half scores. I'm torn between like a 7 and an 8. I think I'm going to have to round this one up to an 8. So I'm giving it a pretty high score. I totally recommend it. If you've liked pretty much any Guy Ritchie film in the past, you'll probably enjoy this movie. If you just want to sit back and munch on some popcorn and watch some like cool action, you're probably going to enjoy this movie. If you want to put a blindfold on and just listen to an epic soundtrack, you'll probably enjoy this movie. If you want a strong ensemble with a very character-driven story, then this one might not be for you. Generally, what I'm getting at is I think most people would enjoy this movie, so I totally recommend you get out and check it out. Let me know if I've convinced you to check out the movie for yourself. If you've already seen it, then let me know what you thought. If you want to address any of my points specifically, any of the pros or cons I listed, absolutely, lay it on me. I would love to get into it with you in the comments. I love talking movies. If you want to see more movie reviews on the channel, I watch movies all the time, so I could probably do them more often. They take a little longer to put together, but I could try and incorporate them more often than I have. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon.